My name's Claire. I'm 28, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and up until a few months ago, I genuinely thought I had a pretty standard office job. Not glamorous, not soul-crushing, just stable. I work in digital strategy for a lifestyle brand called Willow and Heart. It's one of those companies that sells intentional living with $30 soy candles and slogan mugs that say things like, "Own your power," or "Rise, grind, reset." Our aesthetic lives in that cozy, curated space between yoga retreat and influencer starter pack. And while the branding can be a little eye-roll-inducing, the people were nice, the work was solid, and the office had decent snacks. It was enough to make me think, okay, I can build something here. I started at the company a few years back as a digital marketing coordinator. Entry-level, mostly analytics and campaign support. I worked hard, kept my head down, and slowly moved up the ladder. By the end of year 2, I was a digital strategy analyst, leading our email funnel redesign and collaborating across departments. I wasn't setting the world on fire, but I was proud of what I was building. More than that, I finally felt like I belonged in a space that didn't constantly remind me I was a woman in tech-light marketing. The environment was young, mostly progressive, and people remembered your birthday. Low bar, but in corporate America, that's premium. That changed about 9 months ago, when my direct manager, Savannah, left for a VP role at a startup in Denver. She was smart, tough, and always had your back in meetings. She never took credit for your ideas and made it a point to ask how your weekend actually was. Her replacement? That's when the cracks started forming. Enter Russell. Russell Langston, 40-something, former VP of Growth Strategy at some B2B fintech firm no one had heard of. Wore fitted polos like they were armor, and carried a leather laptop case even though he didn't own a laptop. The guy reeked of expensive beard oil and entitlement. The type who called you kiddo, even if you were the same age as his Tinder matches. From day one, his whole personality screamed, "I'm your boss, but I'm cool about it." He walked into our department like he was the protagonist in a workplace comedy only he was writing. Day one, he made a speech about how he was big on mentorship, and how he likes to identify high potential people early. I remember thinking, okay, corporate buzzword guy, let's see what you've got. Turns out what he had was an obsession with proximity and power. He started scheduling check-ins with certain team members, always younger, always women. Never added them to the shared calendar. Always kept them casual. Let's grab a booth, we'll keep it low-key. First I thought I was safe. I wasn't new. I wasn't starry-eyed. I knew the dance of corporate male ego, and I'd gotten pretty good at stepping around it. But within 2 months it became clear. I was on Russell's radar. And not because of my performance review. I'd gotten some soft whispers from the creative director that I was being considered for something bigger. A role was coming down the pipeline, senior strategy lead. Not posted yet, but being crafted around certain team needs. It was vague but encouraging. Then the director of brand engagement mentioned she was excited about where my career was headed. People were nodding in my direction more often in meetings. Things were aligning. Then Russell asked me to meet him for a quick chat after our team sync. He said it real breezy like, "Hey Claire, if you've got a sec after this, let's connect. Got something I want to run by you." That tone, casual, familiar, just a hair too personal. But fine. It's normal for managers to touch base. I didn't think much of it. We went into a small glass meeting room with just 2 chairs and a fake plant in the corner that was somehow always dusty and sticky at the same time. He closed the door again, not weird on its own. Then he started talking. Russell was a talker. One of those guys who doesn't ask questions so much as narrate his own thoughts and then wait for your applause. He launched into a monologue about internal mobility, team chemistry, and high ceilings. Said he'd been keeping an eye on my cross-departmental work. Praised my initiative with the Q1 metrics dashboard. Said I had a rare combination of analytical and emotional intelligence. I said thank you, tried to stay neutral. Then he smiled. That slow practice smirk I'd come to hate. And he said, "Of course, Claire, the higher up you go, the more important trust becomes. Not just trust in your work, but trust in you. The whole you." I blinked. I'm not sure I follow. He leaned back and said, "I guess what I'm saying is sometimes promotion's not just about performance. It's about alignment. Personal alignment." My stomach twisted. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Measured. Loaded. Like he was testing the water, waiting to see if I'd flinch. I didn't flinch. I smiled tight-lipped. "Appreciate the feedback," I said. That was my mistake. I should have asked him to clarify. I should have pushed. But part of me hoped I'd imagined it. That I was reading into something harmless. That I was just tired and cynical and making mountains out of facial expressions. He ended the meeting with, "Let's talk more soon. Big things ahead for you, Claire." Then winked. Winked. Like we had some shared secret. I walked back to my desk like a robot. Sat down. Stared at my screen for 10 minutes without touching the keyboard. That night I told my roommate Danielle. She's in law school and doesn't play. After I told her everything, she set her mug down and said, "Girl, if this is going where I think it's going, you need receipts. Not vibes. Receipts." I laughed, but not really. Because she was right. I didn't want to believe it, but I also couldn't ignore the tightening in my gut. I've worked under enough men in my career to know the difference between professional praise and predatory maneuvering. 2 days later, he sent me a Slack. "Drinks after work tomorrow? Want to chat big picture stuff? Just us." I stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "Sure. What time?" I'd made my decision. Not to play his game, but to record it. The message had been sitting in my Slack for almost 20 minutes. "Drinks after work tomorrow? Want to chat big picture stuff? Just us." That last part, "just us," echoed in my head like a warning bell. I must have reread it 15 times. It was phrased to sound casual, just two coworkers grabbing a drink to talk shop. But I knew better. Russell didn't do casual. Every word was intentional. Every move calculated to feel normal, while nudging boundaries just far enough to test your silence. I could practically hear Danielle's voice in my head. "Receipts, Claire. Not vibes." So I responded with a single line. "Sure. What time?" He replied, 6:15. "That spot on 8th with a jazz playlist and great cocktails. You'll love it." No name. No address. Just that spot. Because of course he assumed I'd know exactly what he meant. He talked about that place all the time in meetings, usually when trying to impress people with how curated his taste was. I didn't respond right away. I just opened my notes app and started planning. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, going over every possible outcome. Was I making a mountain out of a molehill? Was this just another awkward manager trying to bond in all the wrong ways? But no matter how many ways I tried to reframe it, one truth kept pushing itself to the surface. If this were a normal work meeting, it would be on the calendar, not at a bar with cocktails and jazz. The next morning, I went into research mode. Tennessee is a one-party consent state when it comes to audio recordings, which meant I was legally allowed to record our conversation without telling him. I double-checked 3 sources just to be sure. Then I found an app that would record from my phone's internal mic, even while the screen was off. I tested it on the way to work by narrating my grocery list in the car. Playback was clear, crisp, and perfect. At 6 p.m. The next day, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the office and stared at myself. I didn't want to go. My whole body was screaming don't. But I also knew I had to. Not because I owed it to the company. Not because I was trying to play detective. But because I wanted the truth to exist somewhere other than inside my head. If he said what I suspected he was going to say, I needed it on record. I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, activated the recorder, and walked out like I was going to war. The place he picked was called the Rust Note. Dark wood, leather barstools, jazz playing softly through vintage speakers. It was the kind of place designed to feel expensive without being exclusive. A cool boss bar. He was already there when I arrived, seated in a corner booth, waving at me like we were old friends. "Claire," he said, standing up slightly. "Great to see you." He slid back into the booth and gestured for me to sit across from him. I took a breath, smiled like I wasn't internally screaming, and sat. He ordered for me without asking. 2 of the house Manhattans, he told the waitress. "They're phenomenal." I considered correcting him. I wanted a soda water or maybe nothing at all. But I said nothing. I needed the setup to play out exactly how he wanted it. That was the only way to get what I needed. The first 10 minutes were surface level. He talked about team performance, upcoming launches, next quarter pivots. I nodded, added nothing, and waited. He complimented my cross-functional report from last week, said the VP of marketing was impressed with my instincts, and that I had real executive energy. That phrase clanged in my chest like a dropped wrench. Executive energy. That's the kind of praise that's supposed to feel empowering. Coming from Russell, it felt like bait. Then the shift happened. He leaned in, hands loosely clasped on the table, and said, "I think you know why I really wanted to meet tonight." I tilted my head slightly, keeping my expression neutral. "To talk strategy?" He smiled, slow and confident. Strategy, sure. But big picture. I'm talking long-term vision, career trajectory, what it's going to take to get you where you want to be. There it was. The fork in the road. I waited, letting the silence hang. He continued. The senior strategy lead role is happening, probably sooner than expected. And I've already told the exec team you're my top choice. I blinked. That was fast. But here's the thing, he added, lowering his voice. The people who move fastest at Willow and Hart? They're not just good at their jobs. They understand the unspoken parts of the game. The gray area. His eyes locked on mine. The personal relationships. I stayed quiet. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the jazz anymore. He took a sip of his drink. I've seen a lot of talent come and go. People with all the credentials who never figured out that sometimes opportunity doesn't come from a resume. It comes from being in the right rooms, with the right people, knowing when to lean in. I finally spoke. What exactly are you asking me, Russell? He smiled like a magician who thought he'd pulled off the trick. Nothing formal. Just let's spend more time. One-on-one. No pressure. We get to know each other better. Build trust. And if that leads to bigger things, well, that's how leadership works, right? It's built on connection. That word again. Connection. Every time he said it, it sounded less like a bond and more like a transaction. He leaned in a little closer, voice quiet now. Look, Claire, I'm not saying anything has to happen. I'm just saying when I like someone's energy, I invest in them. Fully. You know? I nodded slowly. So, spending more time with you would help my promotion chances? He smiled. Let's just say it wouldn't hurt. I reward loyalty. I wanted to throw my drink in his face. I wanted to scream. Instead, I calmly reached for my glass, pretended to take a sip and smiled. Got it. He leaned back satisfied. Like he'd won something. Like I was already his. 10 minutes later, I excused myself. Early morning meeting, I said. He told me he was glad we talked and to think about it. Promised I would. I stepped out into the warm Nashville night and walked 3 blocks to my car with shaking hands. As soon as I got inside, I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording. 18 minutes and 9 seconds. I pressed play. His voice came through perfectly. Clear. Calm. Incriminating. Everything I needed. That night I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I felt cold. Focused. I sat at my kitchen table while Danielle graded towards flashcards and wrote the email to HR. Subject. Formal complaint, Russell Langston. I attached the file. And I ended with this. This conversation occurred on April 12, 6:15 p.m. At the Rust note. I'm prepared to provide additional context if needed. I'm submitting this because this kind of behavior should not be normalized, especially not by someone in a position of power. I hope the company takes this seriously. I'm done pretending I imagined it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I hit send. It was 1:14 a.m. I stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes after hitting send. I half expected my inbox to catch fire, or my laptop to shut itself down out of corporate self-preservation. But no, nothing happened. Just the quiet whoosh of the email leaving my outbox and disappearing into HR's mysterious black box. It was surreal. 1 minute I was just a mid-level strategist trying to do her job, and the next I was sitting on 18 minutes and 9 seconds of recorded evidence implicating my boss in what could only be described as a high-functioning, well-dressed version of coercion. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who worshipped performance metrics had just tanked his own in the most measurable way possible. The next morning I woke up after 4 restless hours, my stomach in knots. I'd sent the recording to Angela Jensen, head of people operations. Angela had a reputation around the office as someone who followed the rules, kept her cool, and never, ever let you see her sweat. I figured if anyone was going to handle this professionally, it was her. Still, I spent most of the day checking my inbox every 5 minutes, waiting for some sign that someone was listening, that someone believed me. Nothing. Not at 9 a.m. Not at lunch, not by 4 p.m. I started spiraling. I began questioning everything. What if they didn't listen to it? What if the file didn't open? What if I came off too aggressive? What if they thought I was overreacting? It didn't matter that I knew I was in the right. Corporate culture has a funny way of making you doubt your own voice, even when it's recorded and time-stamped. By 6 p.m. I was pacing around my apartment like a caged animal, texting Danielle updates every hour. She finally replied with, Danielle, they're not going to move fast, Claire. They're going to stall. You rocked the boat. Companies hate that. She was right. I'd been expecting fire alarms, sirens, glass shattering. Instead, I got HR silence and the slow drip of Slack messages from coworkers asking if I wanted to join virtual trivia night. 2 more days went by. Still nothing. And then Friday morning, 9:04 a.m. A new email popped into my inbox. Subject: Meeting request confidential. From Angela Jensen. It was a calendar invite for a 10 a.m. meeting. No agenda. Just the word confidential in all caps. My heart dropped into my shoes. I accepted the invite, locked my screen, and headed to the 3rd floor where HR's glass-walled offices stood like tiny conference room aquariums. Angela met me in the hallway. She wore a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. "Claire," she said calmly, "thank you for coming in." She ushered me into a small room with one of those minimalist round tables and 2 identical chairs. On the table sat a folder, a notepad, and a printed copy of the company values. I sat. She sat. And for a moment it was just silence. Then she said, "I want to start by acknowledging the seriousness of what you submitted." That was the first moment I let myself breathe. She didn't ask if it was real. She didn't ask what really happened. She didn't ask if I misunderstood. She said, "We've listened to the recording. Several members of our executive team have as well." Then she added, "It is clear that your manager, Russell Langston, made inappropriate coercive statements that violate both our code of conduct and our anti-harassment policy. There's no ambiguity in the language used. This was not mentorship. This was misconduct." I sat very still. I didn't trust myself to react. I wanted to cry, to scream, to laugh. But I just said, "Okay." Angela went on, "We've placed Russell on administrative leave effective this morning. He's been informed there is an active investigation and instructed not to contact you or any team members." I finally exhaled. "Does that mean he's likely to be terminated?" she said. "But we are following protocol. He'll be given an opportunity to respond." That said, the recording is quite damning. There was a pause. Then she added, "This was brave, Claire. What you did. I don't know if anyone's told you that yet." "They haven't," I said before I could help myself. And to be honest, I didn't feel brave. I felt trapped. She nodded like she knew. "That's why we're revisiting our escalation policies. This should have never been on you to prove." We talked for another 15 minutes about privacy retaliation policies follow-ups. I signed some paperwork, mostly around confidentiality, and she assured me that HR would handle all further steps. "You won't be pulled into this again unless absolutely necessary," she said. "You've already done your part." As I walked back to my desk, something strange happened. I felt nothing. No victory. No triumph. Just hollow. Russell was gone, or at least on the way out. The threat had been neutralized. But the damage he left behind, that lingered. I kept thinking about every moment I'd second-guessed myself. Every time I told myself to be cool, to not rock the boat, to just laugh and change the subject. I kept thinking about the other people in the office, those who probably had similar experiences but didn't have a recording to back them up. How many mentorship drinks had he arranged over the years? How many personal alignment chats? How many careers had he nudged off track with a smirk and a cocktail? I didn't sleep much that weekend. Sunday night, I got an email from Angela. One line. "Russell Langston's employment with Willow and Hart has been officially terminated as of July 23rd. Thank you again." That was it. No company-wide announcement. No HR memo. Just a quiet ending to a very loud mistake. But that's not where the story ends. Because Monday morning I walked into the office and something had changed. People were whispering again. Not about me, about him. The rumor mill was in full spin. No one knew the real reason Russell was gone, but that didn't stop the theories. Some said he stole company data. Others thought he quit because of a better offer. Someone joked that he ran off with an intern. I didn't correct them. I just kept my head down and opened my laptop. By noon, the real reason had started to leak. A Slack message accidentally forwarded to the wrong channel hinted at a personnel issue regarding conduct. Someone else said Russell's login credentials had been revoked before his laptop was even collected. HR posted a vague update about upholding company values and recent transitions. That afternoon, I went to grab coffee and found Maya, one of our junior designers, standing awkwardly near the cold brew keg. She looked at me, then hesitated. Finally, she said, Was it you? I blinked. Was what me? She looked around, leaned in and whispered, the reason he's gone. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She nodded slowly. He used to send me messages late at night. Nothing explicit. Just weird. Like asking if I wanted to brainstorm over wine. I thought I was overthinking it. I looked her in the eye and said, you weren't. She exhaled. It was almost a laugh. Almost. Thank you, she said. Seriously. Thank you. That was the first time I let myself feel it. Not pride. Not vindication. Just relief. I wasn't the only one. And maybe now I wouldn't be the last. By Tuesday morning, the air in the office felt off. Not loud, not panicked, just oddly calibrated. Like someone had changed the pressure in the room, and everyone was too polite to mention it. Russell was gone, and though no one said it directly, everyone felt it. His absence was like a broken elevator. You didn't notice how much of your day revolved around it until it stopped working. People spoke softer. Meetings moved faster. And yet, no one quite looked anyone in the eye for too long. It wasn't grief. It was something else. Something closer to unease wrapped in silence. The official word, per HR, was mutual separation due to role misalignment, which was corporate for we got rid of him but didn't want to say why. No farewell email. No announcement from leadership. One day he was running strategy meetings like he owned the place. The next he was wiped from the Slack directory like an embarrassing typo. That should have been satisfying. But honestly, just made me angry. Not because I wanted a public spectacle, but because the company seemed more committed to protecting its reputation than it ever was to protecting the people inside it. I kept expecting someone from the executive team to say something. An acknowledgement. A line in a meeting. Anything. But days passed and no one did. Not Charles, our CEO. Not Anita from People Ops. Not Marissa from Brand Strategy. They all carried on like nothing had happened, like we hadn't all just witnessed a slow-motion car crash where the car quietly disappeared before anyone could name the driver. The only people who even hinted at what happened were my coworkers, quietly in corners behind lowered voices and cautious glances. Did you hear he's gone? Wait, really gone? What happened? Don't know. But I heard it was serious. Someone in product said they heard he crossed a line. Someone in sales said he got caught up in something legal. By Thursday, the rumor mill had elevated him to cult leader status. One intern whispered that she heard he was being investigated by the FBI, which was both ridiculous and a perfect example of what happens when leadership refuses to name things. But the truth? It lived in the cracks. In the way Maya looked at me and nodded quietly from across the room. In the way Kyle from UX gave me an awkward, "Hey, good job last week," without explaining what he meant. In the 3 separate messages I got that week from women in different departments, all variations of, "Thank you. You weren't wrong. I thought I was the only one." I wasn't. I never had been. That was the part that gutted me. After the 3rd message, I sat in the back stairwell with my head against the cold metal rail, trying to reconcile how many people had silently endured what I was just now blowing open. I wondered how many skipped those mentorship drinks. How many accepted them? How many walked away and never said a word? Angela finally reached out that Friday with a request to debrief. She said I wouldn't be looped into any legal proceedings, that there wouldn't be a formal tribunal or committee hearing. The matter was considered resolved. That word. Resolved. As if a man's casual threats to leverage career advancement for attention could be tidied up with a file folder and an NDA. Still, I agreed to the meeting. We sat in the same conference room as before. Sunlight leaking through the slats on the blinds like it was trying to soften the moment. Angela was professional, calm, and for the first time a little more human. She said, "We've taken this seriously. I want you to know that." I nodded. I wanted to believe her. She added, "Russell's departure was part of a larger internal audit. We're reevaluating our managerial training programs and escalation pathways. Some of our policies will change, but it will take time." There it was again. The quiet caveat behind every HR promise. It will take time. I asked her a question I wasn't sure I was supposed to ask. How many others came forward? She paused. I can't share details. But you weren't alone. I swallowed that sentence like a pill. She handed me a copy of our updated harassment policy. I didn't read it. I just folded it and tucked it into my bag like a receipt for something I never wanted to buy. The meeting ended with a handshake and one final, clipped sentence. "Thank you for your courage." Funny. I never felt courageous. I felt like I'd stepped into the eye of a hurricane with a single shaky umbrella and prayed no one called me dramatic for doing it. After I left the meeting, I walked back through the office like I was seeing it for the first time. The same walls, the same open floor plan, the same stupid inspirational posters about collaboration and clarity. But the place had changed. Or maybe I had. Because here's the thing they don't tell you. When you speak up, the world doesn't clap for you. You don't get a standing ovation. You get watched. People start interpreting your tone, wondering if you'll do it again. Fear a risk. Fear a threat. I could feel it in the way certain managers hesitated around me now. Like I'd gone from future leader to corporate liability. The girl who brought down Russell. The girl who recorded her boss. Never mind why. That Monday, I got a Slack from a senior director I'd worked with twice before. It read, "Hey Claire. Just wanted to say I respect what you did. Took guts. If you ever want to grab lunch, I'd love to hear your perspective on some things." I stared at it. Was it genuine? Was it opportunistic? Was it a trap? I didn't reply. Not because I was scared, but because I was tired of being a symbol. A story. A quiet legend passed from desk to desk like office lore. All I wanted was to do my job, lead my team, and go home at the end of the day knowing I didn't have to trade my integrity for a better title. The only person who gave me space to feel that way was Danielle. That night I sat on our couch, feet tucked under a blanket, a glass of wine in hand. She looked at me and asked, "Do you feel better?" I said, "No, but I feel clearer." She nodded. "Good. Because the only thing more exhausting than carrying a secret is convincing yourself it wasn't real." We sat in silence after that. The kind of silence that feels like honesty. The kind that fills a room without needing to be explained. The next day I came into work and saw something new. A flyer on the bulletin board for a new ethics liaison committee. Open to staff. Voluntary. Confidential. Applications open next week. I didn't decide right away, but I looked at that flyer and thought, maybe this is how it starts. Not with fireworks, but with someone saying, "Not again. Not this time." It had been a few weeks since Russell was officially removed, but it still didn't feel final. Not really. His name had vanished from all internal directories, his calendar events were reassigned or quietly deleted, and his Slack account had been deactivated so completely it was like he'd never existed. But you don't just erase someone like that. His absence hung around like humidity, thick, invisible, irritating. Every time I walked into a meeting he used to run, or opened a file he'd once touched, I felt it. The afterimage. The lingering shape of power once held. That would have been enough, honestly. I could have lived with the silence, the absence, the awkward forward-facing optimism from execs pretending nothing toxic had ever been in the room. But then one Monday morning, I got a very unexpected reminder that the story wasn't quite over. I was sitting at my desk, eyes blurry from too much spreadsheet analysis, when a Slack notification popped up from Ashley in HR. It said, "Hey Claire. Just wanted to let you know we're updating access permissions across several shared folders today. You might get some odd alerts. Feel free to ignore unless it looks urgent." I replied with a thumbs up and didn't think anything of it. Until about an hour later, when I got a Google Drive notification. A new document has been added to PeopleOps/internal, exits, confidential view now? Now I'm not nosy by nature. Okay, I am, but selectively. And that was the digital equivalent of finding a folder marked, "Do not open," in a locked drawer someone left ajar. So I clicked. At first I didn't even register what I was looking at. The file name was vague. Exit_interview PDF. URL. Took me a second. Then it hit me, Russell Langston. I blinked. Scanned the document title again. Realized what I was holding in front of me. His exit interview. Unredacted. Accessible. And very, very not meant for me. My heart raced. I hesitated for half a second. Cursor floating above the document like a guilty whisper. Then I opened it. What I saw was, well, surreal. The document was a transcription, word for word, of Russell's final HR conversation. It wasn't formal like I'd imagined. No lawyers, no statements read into the record. Just Russell and a member of HR, having what was supposed to be a closing dialogue. Except Russell couldn't just leave quietly. Of course not. The man turned his termination into a self-justifying TED Talk. The transcript began with him saying, "Look, I think we've all overreacted here. What I said was misinterpreted. I was trying to mentor, not manipulate." I kept reading. My stomach twisted tighter with every line. Claire's ambitious. I saw potential. I was trying to nurture that. Maybe I was too casual, but that's my leadership style. I connect with people on a human level. Maybe that made her uncomfortable, and if so, I'm sorry for the discomfort, but that doesn't make me a villain. That line. I connect with people on a human level. I wanted to scream. I kept reading. This company's full of people who want their hands held. They confuse clarity for coercion. I never offered anything inappropriate. I simply suggested that Claire's growth could benefit from more relational alignment. The fact that she took it as a threat says more about her than me. Relational alignment? The man had invented an entirely new brand of corporate nonsense to frame what was clearly an attempt to barter time and attention for advancement. And then came the part that made me laugh, actually laugh out loud alone at my desk. He said, "Honestly, I thought there was a connection. I thought she was into the idea. I've been in this business long enough to recognize chemistry." Chemistry. The audacity. As if the uncomfortable silence I held during that entire conversation was me flirting. As if my forced smile, my careful exit, my decision to record him, was a form of seduction. That's the thing about guys like Russell. They live in a world where every interaction with a woman is filtered through a lens of potential, where every smile means I'm interested, and every boundary is a negotiation. It was delusional, but familiar. And then, at the bottom of the document, was a final section labeled, Departing Employee Statement. One paragraph, typed by him, presumably meant to live quietly in an HR file until the end of time. It read, "I believe in strong leadership and authentic relationships. If my methods were misunderstood, I regret that. But I leave knowing I made an impact. Some people don't appreciate unfiltered leadership. That's not my problem." That was it. His grand finale. His swan song. His final love letter to himself. Because make no mistake, this wasn't a defense. It wasn't even an apology. It was a confession wrapped in delusion. A man who had never once believed he was in the wrong. A man so self-convinced of his own charisma. He turned his firing into a misunderstood rom-com, and me? I was just the bitter heroine who didn't know how to receive his gift. I sat there for a long time after reading it. Not angry. Not shocked. Just exhausted. But also weirdly relieved. Because for all the gaslighting that had swirled in the early days, for all the little doubts that crept in when HR took too long to respond or leadership stayed too quiet, here it was. On paper. In his words. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. That he really believed what he said. That I'd seen clearly what others might have tried to blur. And then I printed it. I don't know why. I just did. The printer near my desk coughed it out. 4 crisp pages of twisted narrative and self-mythologizing. I folded them and slid them into a manila envelope, labeled it RL with a Sharpie, and stuck it in the bottom drawer of my desk, behind some old notebooks and post-its I never used. Not because I needed it anymore, but because part of me wanted to remember exactly how the story ended. A few days later, I was walking back from a meeting when Maya caught up with me in the hallway. She looked around, lowered her voice and said, "Hey, I heard a crazy rumor. Did Russell actually say he thought you two had a connection?" I blinked. "Where did you hear that?" She shrugged. "Someone in ops said they saw a transcript. Not sure how it got around. But I just wanted to say, I'm so glad you said something. I was scared of him. Not even for anything specific. Just the way he made everything feel off." I nodded. I wanted to say so many things. Instead I just said, "You're not alone." That afternoon, I opened my drawer and looked at the envelope. It wasn't evidence anymore. It wasn't ammo. It was a time capsule. A record of the moment a man in power revealed everything he believed about women, ambition, and entitlement in one neat PDF. His termination letter had been cold and formal. But this was personal. This was a love note. Not to me, but to the version of himself he couldn't let go of. The kind that says, "I'm the hero of this story and she just didn't get it. And you know what? He's right. I didn't get it. I didn't understand how someone could twist leadership into leverage. How they could confuse boundaries for opportunities. How they could look you in the eye and sell you betrayal as mentorship. But now I do. And I'll never forget it." You'd think that after a boss gets removed for unethical behavior, things would quiet down. That once the emails stop and the manila folders are filed and the Slack pings go silent, the workplace would just slide back into business as usual. But that's not how it works. Not when the removal is just the visible part of a much deeper rot. Russell's exit didn't just leave a vacancy in leadership. It cracked open something bigger, something more delicate. The illusion that things had always been okay. And once that illusion broke, people started noticing everything. It began subtly. In meetings, the tone changed. The forced laughter that used to follow his edgy jokes? Gone. The long pauses people used to make when deciding whether to speak up? Shorter. The interns, especially the women, sat straighter, spoke louder, asked questions without apologizing. I noticed that more than anything, they were no longer looking over their shoulders. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to believe they didn't have to. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to claim credit. I didn't want to be known as that woman, the whistleblower, the avenger, the one who took him down. It wasn't just him I was trying to stop. It was the system that let him operate in plain sight. And that system, despite the fallout, was still very much alive. Still clinging to its processes, its language, its quiet self-protection. But now cracks were forming. HR launched a new series of culture alignment workshops that were half slideshow, half group therapy. Mandatory, of course, but surprisingly unterrible. They talked about power imbalances and influence, about the subtle difference between being supportive and being strategic with someone's vulnerability. I could tell they were trying. Whether out of accountability or self-preservation, I couldn't say. Maybe both. In the second workshop, they used a scenario that felt like a direct copy of what happened with Russell. Only the names were changed and the job titles blurred. I looked around the room as they read it aloud. I saw people shift in their seats. Some of them knew. Some of them really knew. After the session, a man from the finance team I'd never spoken to approached me near the break room. He said, "Hey, just want to say that was a good session. Eye-opening. Made me think about some stuff." I nodded. "Yeah, same." Then he added, "Glad we're having these now. Should have started sooner." I didn't say what I was thinking. They didn't exist, but I let it go. Because the ripple had started. People were paying attention in a way they hadn't before. Co-workers who used to speak in careful code around anything sensitive were now talking plainly. I overheard a junior associate say in a group chat, "Yeah, but if it feels gross, say something. We actually have systems now." The word actually stuck with me. I'd heard rumors that HR had begun quietly re-examining old exit interviews. Apparently, mine had triggered more scrutiny than they expected. One afternoon, Angela pulled me aside and told me, off the record, that a few former employees had reached out since Russell's departure, each with stories that matched a pattern. She didn't go into details and I didn't ask. I didn't need to. I could feel the ripple. It was moving beyond me. One morning, an all-staff email went out introducing a new role, Director of Organizational Integrity. The hire was someone from outside the company. A woman named Kelsey, with a background in ethics and workplace reform. Her headshot was confident, her bio impressive. A few people rolled their eyes. "Another box checker," someone muttered during a meeting. But I withheld judgment. Because change doesn't happen from performative gestures alone. It happens when the right people get in the room and refuse to leave quietly. 2 weeks later, Kelsey requested a one-on-one with me. I agreed cautiously. We met in a neutral corner conference room. She didn't open with praise or platitudes. She said, "I know you're not interested in a spotlight. I know you're probably tired of being asked to relive something you didn't ask for. But I'd value your insight, not about the incident, about the system that made it possible." I blinked, then nodded. We talked for over an hour. Not about Russell. About the subtleties. The way leadership rewarded social bonding over skill. The way mentorship became blurred with access. The way certain behaviors were tolerated because they were charming, visionary, or just how he is. I told her the truth. The problem wasn't one bad actor. It was the unwritten rulebook that let him perform unchecked. She took notes the whole time. Never interrupted. Never tried to steer the conversation. When we finished, she said, "We need a liaison committee. Staff elected. Cross-departmental. Peer-led. I'd like to put your name forward." I hesitated. The idea of formalizing my role in all of this made my skin itch. I didn't want a title. I didn't want to be anyone's martyr or model. But I also knew I couldn't walk away now. Not when the door was finally open. So I said yes. Quietly. Firmly. The following week, a new flyer appeared on every floor. Ethics Liaison Committee, applications open. I watched people read it. Some snorted. Some rolled their eyes. But others took a picture. Asked questions. Asked me questions. Is this real? Will it have teeth? Do we actually get to do something? I told them the truth. If we show up, it will. I was elected. So was Maya, and a woman named Tanisha from Customer Success who'd once called out a director in a meeting for ignoring her data and referencing a male intern's summary instead. The first meeting was quiet, stiff, but honest. And slowly it grew. People started submitting concerns, asking for guidance, wanting to understand the lines between awkward and inappropriate, between pressure and manipulation. We didn't fix everything. We didn't pretend we could. But we made space. We made permission. One day I passed a new hire in the hallway and overheard her telling someone, "Yeah, I heard this place had some issues last year, but they cleaned house. People feel safe now." I didn't correct her. She wasn't wrong. But she also wasn't seeing the whole picture. Safety didn't arrive by accident. It was demanded, fought for, recorded, reported, lived. Some days I still have trouble shaking the past. I'll hear a phrase or catch a look and feel my muscles tense. But it passes. I remind myself. This is the ripple. This is what change looks like. Not loud, not sudden, but persistent. Unapologetic. Refusing to go away. I never got a real apology. Not from Russell. Not from leadership. But I got something else. I got a future where fewer people have to carry what I carried. And maybe, just maybe, that's worth more than an apology ever could be. 3 months after Russell's departure, something shifted again. But this time it wasn't a whisper or a policy or a gesture. It was momentum, and it came fast, loud, and without warning. It started with a company-wide calendar block, labeled Executive Transparency Briefing, Mandatory Attendance. No agenda, no description, just a 2 p.m. time slot on a Thursday afternoon, and a meeting location moved from our usual second-floor flex space to the big open event hall. The one usually reserved for holiday parties and all-hands meetings with catered lunch and folding chairs lined up in precise, corporate rows. People were buzzing before noon, Slack threads lighting up with nervous jokes and armchair theories. Are we getting acquired? Did the CFO screw up our taxes? Is Charles finally stepping down? The guesses spiraled from absurd to anxious, and I said nothing. I had a feeling this wasn't about a financial shift or a leadership change. It was about everything that had been quietly boiling under the surface since Russell had been wiped from the directory, and Kelsey had walked through the door with her notebooks and calm, cutting questions. When 2 p.m. hit, the room was full, standing room only, the kind of pack that only happens when attendance is required and the air feels like it might burst. Charles, our CEO, took the mic first, wearing a slightly wrinkled white shirt and the look of a man who had either not slept or had finally been convinced to stop pretending he didn't know. "Thank you for being here," he said, voice steady but tight. "Today we're going to talk about something that has affected not just this company's operations, but its core values." The room fell completely silent. "Over the past quarter," he continued, "we've conducted a comprehensive culture audit, led by our newly formed Organizational Integrity Office. What we found were consistent patterns that indicate systemic failures in how we handle mentorship, promotion, boundaries, and accountability." There it was. Not coded. Not buried. Systemic failures. He didn't name Russell. He didn't have to. "As of today," Charles went on, 3 additional senior staff members have been placed on administrative leave pending further review. 1 has voluntarily resigned. We are opening an internal review board composed of employees and external consultants to ensure objectivity moving forward. And we are making our culture audit summary available to all staff in a redacted form to maintain transparency. I didn't breathe. I barely moved. Around me, people shifted in their seats, some stunned, some nodding slowly, like they finally had confirmation that their feelings hadn't been fiction. Kelsey took the mic next, delivering the kind of no-fluff breakdown that made her instantly one of the most respected people in the company. She outlined how the power structures had created blind spots, how people in authority positions leveraged ambiguity to protect themselves, how HR had been understaffed and overwhelmed, how the lack of accountability had created an environment where people were too afraid to report, and when they did, were often gaslit or quietly dismissed. "This is not just a leadership issue," she said. "It's a design issue, a systemic issue. It requires all of us to rebuild." She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't need to, because the reckoning wasn't mine alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever sat in a meeting and forced a smile through discomfort, who'd ever been told to be less sensitive, to not take it personally, or to just give him the benefit of the doubt. The reckoning belonged to the people who had watched someone like Russell float upward through the ranks not because he was talented, but because he knew how to be charming in the right rooms and manipulative in the quiet ones. That afternoon, the company released the redacted audit to our inboxes. 56 pages. I read every single word. It detailed patterns of behavior across departments, examples of unstructured mentorship relationships, inconsistent promotion criteria, and informal power channels that bypassed HR. It included anonymous quotes, summarized findings, and next steps. It didn't name names, but it told stories, and some of those stories were mine. Not verbatim, but close enough that I felt seen in a way no HR form letter had ever made me feel. One quote hit me hardest. I didn't say anything because I knew it would cost me something, and I wasn't sure if it would change anything. I stared at that line for a long time, because that was the core of it, wasn't it? The currency of silence. The cost of truth. The fear that speaking up wouldn't fix anything, but would absolutely break you. And now, something had changed. I could feel it in the hallway chatter, in the way people stood differently around one another with less caution, more intention, in the way the interns weren't afraid to challenge assumptions in meetings and weren't immediately dismissed, in the way someone from legal walked up to me that Friday and said, "I know we've never talked before, but I just want to say, thank you." I said, "You're welcome." He paused. "Are you okay?" I thought about it, about everything that had happened, and how some of it still clung to me like secondhand smoke. How I still sometimes checked over my shoulder when I spoke too plainly. How I still carried the weight of that recording in my chest, even after deleting it. I said, "I'm getting there." As I was. The Ethics Liaison Committee had grown from a symbolic gesture to something real. We were looped into onboarding. We reviewed internal policies. We sat in on leadership reviews not to judge but to observe and remind. We were present. And presence, I'd learned, was power. Quiet. Enduring. Impossible to ignore. Kelsey gave us autonomy. Angela, to her credit, supported without smothering. And Charles, once aloof and distant, now showed up more often, asked better questions, and most importantly, listened to the answers. The reckoning wasn't just a one-time cleansing. It was a culture detox in progress. Some people didn't like it. A few left. Others adapted. One department lead tried to push back during an audit, arguing it was all overreaction. He was gone by the end of the week. No fanfare. No announcement. Just gone. The standards had changed. The tolerance had shifted. And people noticed. They talked about it openly now. I overheard one team lead say during a brainstorm, "Let's make sure no one's getting steamrolled here. Equal airtime for everyone." That would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. One afternoon, I passed Maya on the third-floor stairwell. She grinned at me, held up a clipboard, and said, "I'm doing a shadow session with Kelsey. She wants to train me on facilitation." I smiled. "You're gonna be great at that." She grinned wider. "You started something, Claire." I shook my head. We did. And we had. Not with protest. Not with rage. But with truth, accountability, and a refusal to accept that "that's just how it is" was ever a good enough answer. I walked back to my desk that day and opened a blank document, just to see the cursor blink. A single flashing mark in a clean space. A reminder that even in systems built to silence, a new story could still be written. And this one, it was ours now. 6 months to the day after Russell was terminated, I got called into a meeting I hadn't expected, and honestly hadn't wanted. It was from Charles, our CEO, the man who for most of my career at Willow and Hart had existed somewhere between inaccessible and indifferent. He'd always been the kind of executive who floated a few feet above the rest of us, showing up in photo ops and all-hands meetings with the same thin smile and pre-approved anecdotes about company culture. But now he wanted a one-on-one, and I couldn't help but wonder whether this was going to be an awkward thanks or a quiet warning. I arrived at the executive floor, where everything smelled like lemon polish and money, and was ushered into his office by his assistant, who offered me sparkling water with the sort of brisk professionalism usually reserved for courtrooms and plane crashes. Charles stood when I entered. He looked older than he had 6 months ago. Maybe he was. Maybe we all were. "Claire," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming." I sat, keeping my expression neutral. Of course. There was a pause, 10 seconds, maybe 12, long enough for me to wonder if he'd forgotten why I was here. But then he spoke. "I owe you an apology. he said. Not just for what happened, but for what didn't. I blinked. That I hadn't expected. When you reported Russell, he continued, our systems failed you. Our silence failed you. And I want you to know I've come to understand that silence is complicity. I didn't speak up. I didn't lead. I let others handle what I should have personally acknowledged. He folded his hands, and for once, there wasn't the usual polish. No script. Just a man tired and trying. This company was built on ambition and growth, but somewhere along the way we confused success with protection. We protected the wrong things. We covered instead of confronted. That ends now. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say to a man finally arriving at a truth I'd been living with for months. Thank you, I said finally. Felt too small, but it was true. He nodded. I also wanted you to be the first to know. We're officially launching the Claire Davis Fellowship next quarter. My stomach twisted. What? It's a professional development grant. For early career professionals across our offices. Prioritizing mentorship programs with built-in accountability. Peer-reviewed, monitored by your committee. Kelsey said it was the right next step. I stared at him, unsure whether I wanted to cry or laugh or run. You're naming it after me? It started with you, he said. It should be remembered that way. I left the office with the kind of quiet that feels like thunder. A stillness that hums behind your ribs. I took the elevator back down to the 4th floor, stepped into the hallway, and saw Maya waiting by the vending machines. She had no idea what had just happened, but when she looked up, she saw it on my face. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Yeah, actually, yeah. That weekend, I finally cleaned out the bottom drawer of my desk. The manila envelope was still there. Russell's exit interview transcript, the so-called love note that had once felt like a roadmap to madness. I pulled it out, held it for a moment, then fed it through the shredder. Not because I needed to forget, but because I no longer needed to prove. The paper didn't matter anymore. The story was already written. Etched into policy changes, whispered through Slack DMs, shared between interns over lunch. People knew now. And more importantly, they believed. A week later, I stood in front of a conference room full of new hires. It was my turn to lead the ethics liaison introduction, a 15-minute overview of what we were, what we did, why we existed. I watched their faces as I spoke. Curious, cautious, open. I ended my spiel the same way I always did now. If something feels wrong, speak. If someone crosses a line, speak. And if anyone ever tells you that being uncomfortable is part of the job, know that they're wrong. You do not owe your silence to anyone. Someone in the back, young, probably fresh out of grad school, raised her hand and asked, but what if we're wrong? What if we misread something? I smiled. Not condescending. Not dismissive. Just honest. Then we talk about it. Together. We figure it out. You don't have to be perfect to speak up. You just have to be willing. The ripple had become a current. The current had become change. And now that change was becoming culture. Months later, Danielle and I sat on the roof of our apartment building. The fall air sharp but not cold. A bottle of cheap rose between us and the kind of silence that comes after a long chapter finally closes. She poured another glass and said, so, how does it feel to have your name on a fellowship? I laughed. Weird. Heavy. Good. All of it. You deserve it. I didn't do it alone. She raised her glass. But you went first. We clinked glasses and I thought about what it had cost. The late nights, the anxiety, the doubt. The recording. The wait. The fact that I'd once spent weeks thinking maybe I'd ruin my career by refusing to stay quiet. And now I was here. Not victorious. Not untouchable. Just standing. Still. Unbowed. Sometimes justice doesn't come in the form of a courtroom. Sometimes it comes as a quiet return to peace, to purpose, to the simple freedom of showing up at work and knowing you don't have to trade your dignity for a paycheck. Sometimes justice is a system corrected, a culture renewed. Sometimes it's a document shredded, a fellowship launched, a voice heard. And sometimes it's a man's own delusional exit statement, recorded and archived, shredded and forgotten. The final chapter in a story he didn't know he helped write. That was the ending. Not rage. Not revenge. Just resolve. My name is Claire Davis. I said something. And I'd do it again.